Today is Pride Day. No, not that kind of pride, this kind of pride. We're talking about Pride's Purge and revolution in England. How did a beer brewer from Somerset find himself at the gates of Parliament, purging it of unreliable members, implementing a coup d'etat, and enabling a revolution that killed an English king? This is the story of Pride's Purge, a monumental event in the history of England, but also a story that should shatter complacency and hubris in our approach to history. There's been a lot of talk recently about the potential for civil war or other kinds of internal conflict in England. I note in particular the appearances of Professor Betts on various podcasts. The date I'm publishing this video, the 6th of December, is the anniversary of Pride's Purge, and as I also use the moniker of Colonel Pride for my channel, I think this is an appropriate time to reflect on the revolutionary events of 1648 and how they may be enlightening for our own times. In the 1640s, England was convulsed in a series of brutal civil wars that pulled in the other two separate but connected kingdoms of the Stuart monarchy, Scotland and Ireland. The principal combatants were the Royalists, loyal to the policy of King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians. On both sides, there existed many distinctions within themselves, different visions for a post-war England, and this will be important for our story. By the end of 1648, the king had been defeated and captured by Parliament. He was held on the Isle of Wight, and negotiations began for a permanent settlement. The points of discussion included both civil and religious questions. The king displayed willingness to compromise on the former, but not so much the latter. He wasn't in a rush to conclude discussions anyway either, because he expected at any moment assistance to come from either one of his other kingdoms, Ireland or Scotland, or from his wife's country, of France. Parliament was losing patience. They'd been through this process once before already. Having previously already captured Charles, entered into negotiations that all expected to end with a restored monarchy with a strengthened parliament, only for the king to escape and reignite the civil war and force Parliament to capture him a second time. The mood had soured significantly, but what could a moderate parliamentarian do about it? A moderate, in this context, means a man who favoured something like what we would now call a constitutional monarchy and Presbyterian form of church governance, a Church of England without the powerful bishops. Negotiators at the Isle of Wight got on their knees and begged the obstinate king to accept their proposals. They had good reasons to be in a hurry. The war had unleashed unforeseen powers. To defeat the king, Parliament had created England's first large professional standing army, the New Model Army. Having won the war for Parliament, it had become a force in of itself. The soldiers' pay was in considerable arrears, creating a feeling of anger, discontent with the Parliament that had not kept its side of the bargain, while the officers from top to bottom tended to be more radical than the parliamentary norm. They became increasingly concerned that Parliament would strike a deal with the king that betrayed the cause that the army had fought for, whatever that meant in the minds of individual soldiers and officers. The army itself, while bound together by their demand for payment, was internally divided about ideas for the future. At the top, you had General Sir Thomas Fairfax, who was close to the moderate Presbyterian parliamentary average, approximately. Below him, you had men like Oliver Cromwell and his son-in-law, Henry Ireton, who had begun to envision an English Commonwealth, that is, a republic, combined with a radical Protestantism. Besides them, there were the Levellers, whose policy platform they published in a document called An Agreement of the People, which included annually elected parliaments, religious freedom, the end of monopoly restrictions on trade, and equality before the law. These divisions made common political action from the army quite difficult. Henry Ireton feared, just as Charles hoped, that the diplomatic impasse would lead to more fighting or to a turn of kingly government, either from foreign intervention or from the king or parliament agreeing to a compromise. In response to this crisis, he wrote Remonstrance of the Army. This polemic document was a direct attack on the person of the king, blaming him personally for the war and advocating for his arrest and the abolition of the monarchy. Unfortunately for Ireton, at a council of army officers on the 7th of November, the response to his proposals from his fellow officers was not enthusiastic, most agreeing with Thomas Fairfax that England's traditional form of government should not be overthrown. Ireton's masterstroke was to approach the Levellers and negotiate changes to his document, to Remonstrance of the Army. The set of proposals was modified to include Leveller ideas, including a new reformed parliament with an expanded franchise. Meanwhile, Fairfax and the army moderates had sent their own proposals to the king, which merely reiterated the demands Parliament had already made, and the king rejected them. This left the army moderates with only one other option on the table: Ireton's Remonstrance of the Army, along with the new democratizing modifications of the Levellers. The king's obstinacy and Ireton's political acumen had unified the army. Now events moved quickly. On the 1st of December, Thomas Fairfax ordered the king delivered up to the army at Hurst Castle on the English mainland. The next day, the army of 7,000 men under Fairfax occupied London, and Fairfax installed himself at Whitehall. Fairfax no doubt believed that he was positioning himself to force a conclusion to negotiations between king and parliament, but events were immediately to get out of his grasp. On the evening of the 5th of December, there was a meeting of 6 radical officers and members of parliament, including Ireton and quite possibly including one Colonel Thomas Pride, to organize an extension of the army's coup d'etat, without informing Fairfax or the rest of the army leadership. The very next day, they implemented their plans. On the morning of the 6th of December, members of Parliament arrived at the Parliament building and were met by what was for them an unwelcome sight. Colonel Pride stood on the stairs of the entrance, armed soldiers under his command surrounding the entire building. With Colonel Pride was Lord Grey of Groby to help him with identifications. Pride's job was simple. He was there to arrest or turn away all members of Parliament who were considered unreliable. He arrested about 45 of them and turned away many more than that, creating the Rump Parliament, a parliament purged of all the moderates, leaving a radical husk of a parliament that would put its king on trial and execute him less than 2 months later on January the 30th, 1649. This was Pride's purge. The listener may be surprised that I have not as yet much mentioned the name of Oliver Cromwell. He had been occupied with the siege of Pontefract at the time of Pride's purge and didn't make his way to London until the end of December, giving him plausible deniability. He denied any knowledge of the plan, but that since it was done, he was glad of it and would endeavour to maintain it. Pride's purge had not only removed the moderates from Parliament, but had taken the wind out of the sails of the moderate generals like Fairfax, who had lost control of their own officers. The radicals like Cromwell and Ireton, supported by men like Pride, now had the stage to themselves. Cromwell, with a few more twists and turns yet to go, would go on to become the absolute ruler of a new revolutionary republican English government that would conquer its immediate neighbours and wage war with considerable success upon its main European rivals. Who was this man, Colonel Pride, who gave his name to the purge? He was a man of modest Somerset background who had worked as a haberdasher in London before making money in the brewing business, and had fought his way through the Civil War and risen in rank. His subsequent loyalty to Oliver Cromwell would see him ennobled as Lord Pride, and he acquired Nonsuch Palace, a former property of Henry VIII. Not bad for an obscure boy from the West Country. He was a Puritan in religion and a committed revolutionary and republican in politics. In 1657, several years into Cromwell's direct rule, Cromwell was considering adopting the title of king. When the matter was put to Thomas Pride, Pride said, "He shall not." Cromwell took the counsel of Pride and other Republicans and stuck with the lesser title Lord Protector. Why does all this matter? There is a certain Whiggish tendency to see the English as an unrevolutionary people. We like conservative institutions. We're not embarrassed by institutions that other countries would consider anachronistic. We don't protest like the French or riots like the Irish. The events of the 17th century, however, suggest very strongly there is nothing inherent to the English national character that they will not engage in revolution. Coup d'etats, the tragedy of civil war, political purges, they are all part of our history. When the day comes that some political figure like Ireton or Cromwell orders some similar act to Pride's purge, he will find his Colonel Pride. The comforting idea that these things are un-English is a complacent attitude of the 19th and 20th centuries. In my approach to history on this channel, I hope to always reject such complacency. That is why I adopted the moniker Colonel Pride for this channel, not because I think his actions were necessarily good, but to warn myself against that kind of complacency, the complacency of believing in a single line of English historical development. If we want to throw a wrench in the works, to step off the track of preconceived historical destiny, we can do it. A future revolutionary England has plenty to look back on in its own history without looking abroad for French or American models. Events are not preordained by national character. Events often develop a logic of their own, and historical characters like Thomas Fairfax and Henry Ireton and Oliver Cromwell must respond. Sometimes, like Cromwell, they master these events, like a man taming a wild horse. Others, like Fairfax, lose control. Fairfax initiated the English coup, believed he was in control of it. He took the king and he led the army into London. But then other men, more radical characters, seized the reins. One step led to another, yet more radical than the last. And within 2 months, an attempt to force a conclusion to peaceful negotiations became regicide and revolution. I'm not going to make any kind of prediction here about the future of civil conflict in Britain. There are plenty of people playing that game, and they are welcome to it. All I want to say is this: small groups of radicals can change history, and England is not exempt. Is that good or not? Well, perhaps that depends on if you get the right radicals. Happy Pride Day, everyone.